The 80s didn't just make bad movies, it made B-movies so nasty you can't believe they actually got made. Alien eggs packed with real animal guts, Vietnam vets spreading a cannibal virus, and a Bigfoot slasher gory enough to get banned. These are the best 80s B-movies Gen Z never found. Chopping Mall is the kind of movie where you already know what you're in for just from the title. 8 teenagers get locked in a mall after hours, and instead of security guards, they've got 3 killer robots chasing them down. It's got every teen movie cliché you can think of, but it never drags, and the cast is actually likable. The setting helps. They filmed in a real mall, the Sherman Oaks in Los Angeles. If you've seen Fast Times at Ridgemont High or Commando, you've seen this place. They had to wait until the mall closed at 9, then shoot all night until sunrise. Originally, this was a movie called Killbots, running close to 90 minutes. It flopped in its first limited release. So Roger and Julie Corman cut 15 minutes, gave it the campy new title, and suddenly it became a home video hit. This is what happens when you take a slasher movie and hand it off to the most messed up production team in Soho. Don't Open Until Christmas is a killer Santa movie set in London where some guy with deep childhood trauma is murdering anyone in a red suit. It's not a good movie in any conventional sense, but if you're into grimy 80s sleaze with a side of broken film reels, this one's essential. Edmund Purdom stars as the cop on the case, but also originally directed it, until he quit mid-production. Scenes were then finished by the screenwriter and a few uncredited folks who were also eventually fired. The entire shoot was stitched together across months using different lighting, crews, and even different film stock. The killer Santa angle was actually added late to ride the outrage over Silent Night, Deadly Night. Producers crammed in new murder scenes to cash in on that controversy. The result is a barely coherent mess, but a fun one. 2 Vietnam prisoners of war come home to Atlanta with more than just trauma. They're carrying a virus that turns people into cannibals if bitten. Once they're back, the infection spreads and the city starts to fall apart. This is an Italian exploitation film trying to hit 2 trends at once: the cannibal craze sparked by Deodato's films and the prestige war dramas that followed The Deer Hunter and Apocalypse Now. The premise is outrageous, but the film is put together better than you'd think. A lot of it was filmed guerrilla style on real streets in Atlanta, with actors covered in blood running around in public. Locals thought the attacks were real and called the police multiple times. It's not as extreme with gore as other Italian horror of the time, which is why some fans dismiss it as a toned-down George Romero ripoff. John Saxon stars, but he's made it clear over the years he's not proud of it. He only took the role after insisting that the producers cut the most graphic violence from his scenes. Years later, Saxon admitted he mostly did the film for the paycheck and the free trip to Europe. Harry Stadling works in a toy factory. When he was a kid, he saw something that shattered his belief in Santa, and he's been obsessed with Christmas ever since. His apartment is packed with decorations, he keeps a naughty or nice list for kids in his neighborhood, and when his company announces a charity toy drive but makes employees foot the bill, he finally snaps. This isn't a slasher stacking up a body count. It's about one man's slow mental collapse. Some people today would probably call it more of a psychological thriller than a horror movie. Writer-director Lewis Jackson spent almost 10 years getting it made, rewriting constantly. John Waters later called it his favorite Christmas movie, a masterpiece of weirdness. It's low budget, but you don't forget it, especially the ending. A hot air balloon crashes on a remote island. The survivors meet a descendant of Dr. Frankenstein, who's carrying on the family experiments. There are mutants, Amazons, alien leopard bikini girls, and a floating head of John Carradine showing up to say cryptic things. None of it makes any sense. It's one of those so bad it's hilarious movies where every scene feels like it came from a different script. Like, for example, the survivors show up in a perfectly working raft, then immediately go looking for wood to build a raft. There's Sheila Frankenstein with a massive platinum wig, a 200-year-old colleague of the original Doctor, and a final fight between zombies, our heroes, and a Frankenstein monster who can't do much of anything. So for fans of truly terrible cinema, it's an absolute goldmine. A ship drifts into New York Harbor. Everyone on board is dead, and their bodies look like they've exploded from the inside. The cause? Alien eggs filled with acid strong enough to tear you apart. The trail leads back to a Mars mission a few years earlier. One of the astronauts came back with strange stories about a cave full of eggs. Now he's a drunk, but he's the only one who can help track the source, which turns out to be a coffee plantation in South America run by alien-controlled clones. They made this movie right after Alien, and you can see the influence. But instead of chest bursters, these eggs pop with enough force to blow you apart. And they filled them with real animal guts from a slaughterhouse in Rome. The smell on set was so bad, actors were vomiting for real. In the US, most of the gore was cut, and distributors tried to pass it off as an Alien sequel, even though it had nothing to do with it. And during filming, Italian police showed up after neighbors complained about the stench coming from the set. To say the very least, they don't make them like this anymore. It's a horror film that epitomizes the term 80s cheese. This movie is what happens when a muscle-bound metal singer decides to write, star in, and score his own horror film, with no one around to tell him no. John Michael Thor plays the lead singer of a band that retreats to a remote farmhouse to rehearse and accidentally awakens Satan himself. So now they have this insane showdown. The behind the scenes is even more absurd than what's on screen. The monster puppets were literally glued together the day before filming. Some still had wet glue on them when the cameras rolled. The whole film feels like a passion project gone off the rails. You watch this for one reason only, to see Thor fight rubber demons with his shirt off while metal ballads play in the background. If Jaws had you afraid to get into the water, this film will make you afraid to pee in the woods. Night of the Demon is a deep-cut Bigfoot slasher that goes way harder than it has any right to. An anthropology professor and his students head into the woods to investigate a series of murders, and yeah, they find Bigfoot, but not the cuddly kind. This one shreds people. The film ended up on the UK's Video Nasties list for good reason. Several scenes were so gory they got the whole movie pulled from shelves. Funny thing is, most of the gore scenes were improvised on set, including the infamous biker castration, without telling the producers. Lead actor Michael Cutt said it felt less like a professional shoot and more like an underground splatter movie filmed in state parks without permits. And yes, the guts were real. They bought animal entrails from a butcher, dumped them under hot lights, and then complained when extras refused to eat lunch on set. You can smell this movie through the screen. This might be the best slasher of the early 80s that nobody saw the way it was meant to be seen. My Bloody Valentine tells the story of a small mining town haunted by a trauma from its past, and when they try to bring back the annual Valentine's Day dance, someone with a pickaxe makes sure the party ends fast. The production went all in on practical gore. Director George Mihalka shot incredibly elaborate kills using real animal organs and intricate prosthetics. But then came the MPAA. Paramount had just gotten slammed over Friday the 13th, and they weren't about to risk it again, so nearly every gore shot was cut. We're talking about days of work reduced to blink and you'll miss it frames. Some death scenes were so censored that people thought they were missing reels. For decades, fans begged for the uncut footage. It was finally restored in 2009 from a scratched-up work print in Mihalka's personal archive, and it still looks rough because it was never finished for release. Absurd is an Italian horror film about a bioengineered killer who can regenerate from almost any wound. So naturally, he walks around impaling people on saw blades, drills, and church crosses like it's a hobby. It was sold as a spiritual sequel to Anthropophagus, but there's no real connection besides George Eastman playing another unstoppable psychopath. Behind the scenes, it was everything you'd expect from early 80s Italian horror. Unregulated, exploitative, and soaked in pig guts. The gore effects used real butcher scraps, buckets of intestines that had to be swapped out mid-scene when they started to rot under the lights. You can see actors genuinely gagging. The film got banned in the UK as part of the video nasty panic, though plenty of VHS collectors bought it thinking it was just some weird action flick thanks to the vague English title.